webinar featuring Forrester Research Incorporated and sponsored by Citrix Systems. My name is Scott Lindars, and I'll be your moderator today. In a moment, we'll hear from our speakers, Benjamin Gray, a senior analyst with Forrester Research, and Paul Martini, CIO at Citrix. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. The slide deck will also be made available for download at the GoToWebinar link after the event. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit it using the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar interface. We'll address the questions at the end of the presentation. But before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to take a minute and take a quick poll of the audience for one of our polling questions. So this question is really geared around what is your current interest in BYO programs? So let's take a minute and see what the audience has to say. Okay, we have about 75% of people voting, so we'll go ahead and start pulling up the results. And there we are. We can see a good percentage, almost half of us, are actively looking into a BYO program sometime in the near future, as well as a good percentage that are actively doing the program or very close to it, and then some folks that are really just getting started. So good representation, and I think this is a good indication of the interest in BYO programs in the enterprise. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ben, who's going to go ahead and get us started. Our first speaker is Benjamin Gray, a senior analyst with Forrester Research. Benjamin serves the infrastructure and operational professionals and is a leading expert on business class PCs and desktop operating systems. He also researches business class mobile devices, mobile operating systems, and mobile device management solutions. Benjamin helps Forrester clients develop and improve their strategy around client hardware and client operating systems. And with that, Ben, I'll hand it over to you to get started. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott, for that kind introduction. So good afternoon, everyone, from Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is Ben Gray, and I'm a senior analyst within Forrester's Infrastructure and Operations team. And I spend actually the majority of my time assisting Forrester's IT clients on their next generation client computing strategies. And I'm thrilled to be here on Citrix's behalf to present on what is such a fundamentally hot topic among Forrester's own enterprise IT clients. And that is bring your own devices in the enterprise. You know, I mentioned that this is such a fundamentally hot topic because I think there are a lot of desktop managers worldwide that are fundamentally coming to some very harsh realities. Inevitably, they're looking at redesigning their desktop architecture. They're looking to upgrade to new hardware. They're looking to move to 64-bit. They're looking to standardize now on Windows 7, on IE8 and IE9, on Office 2010. They're looking to revisit the security and management of their mobile devices. And so we've seen a lot of IT managers realize that they fundamentally need to determine a way in which they can provide better levels of service, support, management, and security to their increasingly decentralized mobile and distributed workforces. And so inevitably, bring your own is a really new area in which we're seeing a large percentage of IT managers revisiting. So quite frankly, bring your own as a concept have been around for a lot of years. And now there are a lot of IT managers that are arguably revisiting it. And in fact, Forrester as a research firm is encouraging our IT clients to evaluate and to consider bring your own devices as a means to bring a measure of control to an increasingly muddled technology landscape, while at the same time not stifling employee flexibility and innovation. So over the course of the next 20 minutes or so, we've got a pretty big area to cover. So the agenda, first of all, I'm going to share with you how we're seeing empowered workers, empowered and resourceful workers driving this desktop revolution. I also wanted to touch upon the role that self-service will play in this next generation computing strategy. We're seeing a lot of IT managers look to strive to provide self-service and self-provisioning to their end users. But what's driving a lot of interest in bring your own computer, bring your own PC, bring your own device, bring your own smartphone, are these new devices, these consumer-centric devices that fit squarely between a smartphone and a notebook, where increasingly we're seeing end users and large enterprise customers embracing as a means to accelerate their bring your own device strategies. And then finally, I just wanted to touch upon the role that desktop virtualization plays, and arguably the role that it can play from a technology standpoint, but arguably the role that it should play in enabling bring your own devices. So without any further ado, let's just dive right into it. So what we found, having been covering this area for north of 30 years, is that it's been interesting to see how devices bleed into the enterprise space. So going back nearly 30 years ago, PCs were introduced, and much to the chagrin of a lot of IT managers, it didn't necessarily find a lot of immediate value to providing their workers with these devices. You know, and so they've lost that battle. Gone are the days. Now a lot of organizations sort of progressed into a two-sizes-fit-all approach where you're onboarding new employees, and depending on their level of mobility, they're either provisioned with a desktop or a laptop. You know, and even those days are gone. Now employees are having obviously much loftier mobility expectations. They're seeing the pace of consumer technology evolve very rapidly, and in fact a lot faster than we've historically seen enterprise class desktops and laptops evolve. And we're also seeing a lot of these empowered, resourceful employees having much stronger preferences with regard to the devices that they're provisioned with, and at the end of the day, also the applications that they're provisioned with by IT. And an interesting trend that we've been tracking over the course of the last couple of years is that, you know, historically these devices have bled into the enterprise through these empowered workers, through executive managers, IT, sales professionals, where these were corporate liable devices. IT centrally bought them, provisioned them, and handed them out to employees that qualified. Well, now we're seeing a very counterintuitive trend in that a lot of these consumer-centric devices are now bleeding into employees' own pockets, regardless of whether IT has officially blessed them or not. And so we saw it with smartphones, where a lot of companies have historically been a one-size-fits-all approach where everybody's free to get a smartphone so long as it's a BlackBerry. And for good reason, because BlackBerry had been the, you know, and still is, in fact, the gold standard with regard to the ongoing manageability and security of the platform. But as employees are looking to do more on their mobile devices, more than just email and contacts and calendar, they're actually looking to consume information, create content, manipulate Office documents. You know, clearly IT managers are facing this overwhelming demand to loosen their restrictions with regard to the devices they support, and inevitably we're seeing huge amounts of demand for iPhone and for Android-based devices, smartphones and slates, WebOS-powered slates moving forward. Even Windows Phone from Microsoft looks really promising. So there's going to be seemingly no end in sight into the devices that IT will ultimately be tasked to provision to their workforce. But in order to do that, they can't allow any management or security compromises. So bringing it back to the enterprise market, Forrester actually got some pretty interesting data results where we actually surveyed information workers directly, end users directly, circumventing IT to understand what kinds of devices that they're provisioned with for work purposes. And it's a pretty bleak picture. 82% of US-based information workers are provisioned with the desktop. Clearly notebooks are now proliferating into the enterprise space, but not as widely deployed as I think a lot of IT managers would have expected. Even smartphones, we see these amazing smartphone shipment numbers. At the end of the day, only about 14% of US information workers are accessing their smartphones for work purposes, at least on a weekly basis. So IT managers have a lot of work ahead of themselves. And what we're finding is that they also need to really get a better understanding as to the types of user segments that they happen to support. So coming out of this very large survey of information workers, what Forrester's found is that IT managers need to get a better understanding as to how resourceful and how empowered their employees feel, not just with regard to the devices that they're provisioned with, but also the applications they're digesting, the physical locations in which they're most productive, during what work hours, and the management and security policies and access to sensitive information that employees have. And a lot of this quantitative analysis has been, we've poured a lot of effort into what we consider our HERO index, our index of highly empowered, resourceful operatives. And essentially, to cut a long story short, what we found is that only 80% of these informations can be classified as HERO employees. These are employees that are very highly empowered, have much stronger, loftier mobility and consumerization demands of IT, and these demands are actually being met. In fact, the vast majority, 80% of these information workers are being under-provisioned by IT. And so IT's got to realize that, unfortunately, they're leaving too many employees behind. 34% are in this lockdown. They don't know anything outside of their own line of business applications. Another 34% can be classified as disenfranchised. They want to do more with their work machines and work applications, but they don't have access to a lot of these devices and applications. Then interestingly enough, another 13% we classify as rogue employees. These are employees that want to do more than what they're being provisioned with and are actively trying to circumvent IT policies in order to do that. And so we're seeing these highly empowered workers driving this need to evolve the desktop. And as IT managers increasingly now open up to these demands of these empowered workers, we're seeing them strive to support self-service. So when I talk about self-service, we're seeing IT managers allow employees to feel highly empowered and to be able to self-provision themselves with arguably anything. That could be specific lines of business applications that they need in order to do their jobs better, faster, and cheaper. That could mean accessing certain websites that, could prove as a productivity enhancer. That could mean accessing smartphones or ongoing voice and data services plans to help, pay back the ongoing voice and data services in which they might be consuming on their mobile devices, regardless of who physically owns the actual hardware of that device. And so what we found is an interesting data point. Already 40% of these information workers are empowered enough that they can self-provision something regarding their client computing strategy. And more often than not, that means applications on their work PCs, but increasingly it's bleeding into the smartphone space, increasingly as well the ongoing voice and data services plan, and inevitably into the tablet space as well. And so as these highly empowered workers think about what kinds of services they're expecting from IT, at the end of the day, they're less inclined on the technology perspective. They couldn't care less what tools and solutions you're using, so long as it matches their expectations regarding they want to become much more device independent. They don't want to have to be locked into a standard gray box from a tier 1 PC OEM. They want some flexibility. And that flexibility could mean IT centrally buying these devices and giving them more choice, or that could even mean offloading the device selection to end users directly. They want portability. They don't necessarily even want to be locked into a single device. They want to be able to access their corporate resources and applications from any device that they happen to have access to from that particular location at that particular time. Increasingly self-service as well. They want to be able to self-provision their devices with applications. They want to be able to upgrade to new operating systems whenever they feel like they stand to benefit the most. So they want this immediate gratification, pay-per-use, always on, instant on, and fundamentally a modern desktop experience, because at the end of the day, they've been exposed to a lot of these services on their home PCs. Now they're coming into the workforce, and they're expecting a comparative, if not superior, user experience. And so what we're finding is that slates are really accelerating firms' bring-your-own-device strategies. And so when I mention slates, the iPad inevitably comes up most frequently on client inquiries. What we found through a survey of about 3,000 IT decision makers that we just wrapped up in the third quarter of this year, only 17% of IT managers can honestly claim that they haven't seen or heard of much interest in either an iPad or iPad alternatives that can be classified as a touchscreen tablet. So there's overwhelming broad interest, and it's by line of business very frequently, but more often than not, it's this broad interest spanning multiple departments, multiple levels of management, as well as select individuals, select end users that historically might have been IT's most vocal critics. And so IT is being tasked to support these inherently non-Windows-based devices that they historically wouldn't have ever considered supporting, but now they're trying to get much more proactive about the devices that they provision to their workforce. And why are they open to this shift? Well, first of all, the technology is really becoming much more mature. Now organizations can find a way to deliver applications across devices, so they're not locked into a single platform or screen size. But increasingly, we're even seeing some HR departments trying to mandate this device flexibility and portability because they want to be able to attract and retain the top job talent that's on the market today. So we're seeing, for a lot of reasons from a technology standpoint, but arguably more importantly from a business standpoint, as to why IT managers need to be much more flexible in terms of the services they provide to their employees. And so what's driving this overwhelming demand to support devices like an iPad? Inevitably, it's the more portability. So users are tired of lugging around a 5 or 6 pound workhorse laptop. Increasingly as well, it's executive managers, line of business managers that would still want to be provisioned with an enterprise class desktop or notebook, much like they historically have been. But for some of their trips or for when they go on vacation, they'd love to be able to just simply bring an iPad or a touchscreen tablet and still be able to check their email or log into one of their line of business applications to stay in touch with their colleagues and coworkers. So we're seeing a lot of IT managers increasingly open to this, but at the same time they're really struggling with, look, there are a lot of technology challenges we're facing, but at the end of the day, this isn't necessarily just IT devising a strategy. We're going to have to work with the business to understand what kinds of projects we should prioritize short and long term, but inevitably Slate support is toward the top of the list of most firms' IT priorities. And then finally, getting to the end of my portion of the presentation, I just want to leave you with the role that desktop virtualization technically can and arguably should play as firms enable and explore bring your own devices, bring your own PCs, bring your own computers. So IT managers are inevitably very focused on investing in desktop and application virtualization. And I tell a lot of clients, look, at the end of the day, you can spend millions and millions of dollars recoding all your applications for native compatibility with an operating system if you want to deliver the best user experience to your users. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to do it all over again with Windows 8 or with Windows 9. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations recognize that we need to get out of this never-ending rip and replace cycle. And we also realize that from a technology standpoint, virtualization does reduce the dependencies that operating systems have on the hardware and that applications have on the operating system. And so increasingly, we're seeing IT managers prioritize their investments in desktop and application virtualization for a lot of good reasons. They're looking to extend the life of their machines. They're looking to centralize the data from the endpoint device, which is inherently difficult to manage and secure, shift that to the data center, which is much easier to patch, to manage, and provide ongoing operations too. We're seeing employees actually being more productive, avoiding workforce interruptions, having more flexibility to access their corporate resources from whatever devices they prefer. we're also seeing fewer desk-side support visits and operational efficiencies as to why organizations are embracing desktop and application virtualization. But to bring it back to bring your own PC and bring your own devices, we're seeing a lot of organizations sort of grapple with all the different flavors. There are a lot of technology solutions from which to consider, and even within the technology solutions, there are a lot of architectural nuances in which you can deliver these applications to workers. And so historically, how companies have embraced desktop virtualization has inevitably evolved over time. It started with terminal services and shared hosted applications. It's then shifted to VDI. Now a lot of organizations are exploring local desktop virtualization and even type 1 bare metal client hypervisors, as well as application virtualization as the future of software delivery. And so at the end of the day, there is no silver bullet. There's no one-size-fits-all approach for all users, which is why Forrester as a research organization has been encouraging IT managers to better understand what types of users, what types of user segments they support and how they can better service them and take advantage of these alternative computing models to provide better levels of service and support and mobility and flexibility with regard to the devices that these employees access. But to bring it back to bring your own devices, in terms of some emerging best practices that Forrester has engaged with a lot of clients on over the course of the last 2-3 years, first of all, the first step that you need to really take is to assess your employees. Because there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and because some users should absolutely qualify for a bring-your-own-device plan, while others very clearly cannot, you want to make sure that you get a better understanding as to the application stack that users need to be provisioned with, the levels of security and access to sensitive information that they have across devices, and how they're connecting to these secure, and highly valuable information. So realizing that bring your own probably isn't meant for everyone, but there is a certain class of highly empowered, resourceful operatives that it probably makes a lot of sense for. But in order to do it properly, we're encouraging companies to invest in desktop virtualization as the basis for a bring your own campaign, bring your own device campaign. So fundamentally, virtualization is the future of the corporate PC. It will very likely take most large enterprises many years to complete the physical to virtual shift, and over time, inevitably, they're going to be tasked with supporting a hybrid environment. But inevitably, you're seeing a lot of organizations realize that they can become much more device independent by investing in some of the best solutions on the market today in terms of desktop virtualization. And they also, this isn't necessarily IT locking themselves in a room and designing, a most efficient delivery mechanism for applications that, highest level of security and management policies. But this is IT collaborating with the business to understand what needs they have and how those needs are different by geographic region, even by age of their employee base. This is also IT working with human resources, working with legal, working with finance to determine if a stipend model should be a part of this discussion, and if so, how do we tier that stipend model? What kinds of employees should have access to bring your own, and what kinds of employees should qualify perhaps for that stipend model? Obviously working with legal as well to determine what kinds of sensitive information these users have, how can we properly ensure compliance with whatever internal or legal requirements that we're facing, which is obviously very much top of mind for some of the more heavily regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, federal, state, and local government agencies. And also making sure that IT reserves a right to confiscate the device if in the event there's some sort of data security breach that they need to conduct an investigation. So inevitably we're seeing a lot of IT managers revisit their policies, and in order to do it, they're actually requiring that for employees to be a part of this program, they require that their direct managers approve because it might have chargeback implications. And as well, these users need to read through and understand the various policies that are associated with the bring your own device strategy. They need to understand it, and they need to specifically agree to these policies. Because in doing so, IT is essentially offloading some of the day-to-day responsibility to end users themselves. Certainly considering a stipend model is something that we're seeing a lot of firms revisit. And in fact, we've even seen some progressive companies explore bring your own PC altogether without a stipend model. But increasingly, we're also seeing IT really try to provide more empowerment to these users, encouraging users to self-provision with applications, with smartphones and slates. And in doing so, we're even seeing some progressive IT departments encouraging end users to self-support each other. So they're posting instructions on how to get it up and running. If they can figure it out, that's great. And if they can't figure it out, don't necessarily come to IT for assistance. Rather, we're going to set you up with this great, portal with a plethora of information to support you. And in fact, IT is often even encouraging their pilot users to engage with their peers, engage with other pilot users to troubleshoot issues, to share best practices, and to spend the time to actively encourage users to overcome some of the early lessons learned without having to bog down IT's productivity. So there are a lot of best practices in which they're emerging that will be the basis of some upcoming research. But at this stage, I'd love to hand it back over to Jason to take you through one more audience poll before we turn it back over to Paul, actually, to share Citrix's own case study of bring your own devices. So Jason, over to you.
Thanks so much, Ben. As you said before I introduce our next speaker, I'm going to go ahead and launch a second poll question. I'm also going to address one of the questions that came up because it's relevant to this question. And that was, what is a stipend model? And I just want to spend a minute on that. When we think about BYO, there's really kind of two approaches an organization could take. One being the stipend program that Ben just talked about, where companies providing a financial stipend to employees to go out and purchase their own device. And the other would be a traditional kind of bring your own device, bring your own existing device that you already have at home, whether that's a tablet or a Mac, and bring that into the organization. So when we look at this question here, you can think about both models and really answer this in a broader sense. If your organization was going to adopt a BYO program, whether that's stipend or bring your own existing, what are the types of devices that your organization would be looking to support and include in that program? And we'll let the poll go for a little bit more. We got about a 60% response rate, so I'll run it for a few more seconds, and we'll take a look at the results. Okay, I'll go ahead and look at the results. And to no surprise, what's on the high end? Tablets. They're the biggest thing these days that everyone's interested in. Smartphones, of course, and then your traditional devices, laptops and netbooks. So really across the board, there's interest, and I think this is a good figure to look at because you see that a BYO program really works for all types of devices. It's not limited to just laptops or phones. The organization can decide which devices they want to include and give the employees, the biggest amount of freedom to bring the device that works for their work lifestyle. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Paul. I'd like to introduce Paul. He's the CIO and Corporate VP of Operations here at Citrix. He joined Citrix in 1999 and assumed the role of CIO and Corporate VP of Operations in January of 2007. Prior to joining Citrix, Paul worked for AT&T Bell Laboratories and Lucent Technologies for 15 years in various roles in R&D, sales, and services. And with that, Paul, I hand it over to you to get started.
Oh, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. For the next few minutes, I'm going to take our time and try and step us through how Citrix implemented their Bring Your Own Computer to Work program. We implemented this program about 2 years ago, and we've really seen some interesting results along the way. When we first think about a Bring Your Own device, traditionally, IT has always wanted their user base to really have one device that they manage, that they monitor, that they control, and they basically only want them to use work stuff on that device. And what the users really want is their choice of any different device. They want to be able to bring any device to work. They want to use any device. They want to visit any website. They want to have that freedom that they do when they're at home. Okay, they don't want to be locked down when they are at work. And so really to start addressing that, you have to start thinking about delivering IT as a service opposed to managing it. And when we think about that, we think about, kind of a bring your own device or bring your own computer. So why would you offer a program like this? Well, one, it allows employees to pick and choose the laptop and the OS of their choice. It's what they're most comfortable working with. You can provide the same experience as a managed device, or perhaps even a better experience since they're using a device of their choice. You can certainly reduce the dependency on IT because you're going to allow an employee to take on some of the responsibility that IT used to have. Okay? And if you provide self-service, and we did it via a BYOC website, you basically empower the employee to prepare their device to connect securely to your infrastructure. And really what you're doing is you're controlling the service and not the hardware. You start to care less and less about the hardware, and you're really just controlling the service. And as long as you make it simple to participate, I think you'll get a broad adoption. So having said that, we had stepped through really a program, like, as I mentioned, about 2 years ago, and we went through 5 steps. And it started off with a survey, and it ended up with our program rules. So I'm going to take you through briefly the 5 steps that we went through. And we did start off with a survey. Anecdotally, we had heard that employees were interested, but when we sent out a survey, we asked them several questions and across 3 categories. And the first was, why do you want to participate in a program like this? Would you be willing to take on some additional responsibilities, in a program like this? And what benefits do you think you would derive from a program like this? And the top 3 answers are here. Their choice was outside of what IT offered. So we had probably 9 different managed devices that we offered employees, but their choice was outside of that. They certainly were willing to take on the added responsibility, and we'll step through what those responsibilities are in a few moments. And they all believed they would be more productive, and I kind of added there, and also happier. I don't have a way to measure a productivity increase, but I do know through a follow-up survey that employees were very, very enthused about the program, and they were happier that they got to pick and choose the device to use for work as well as their personal use. And then we asked IT, and so I had kind of a separate survey really just targeted towards the IT group, and I asked them what they thought about it, and kind of in the same context, and they came back with, well, we think it's going to reduce the dependency on us and to procure and manage the laptop, so they felt that was a positive. They believed it would save time and expense for sure, and they also felt it was important to keep it very simple and provide it as self-service, because if you don't provide it as a self-service, then you're just going to put the burden back on IT in a different form. So if they're not managing the device and handing it out, but they get an influx of questions and people can't manage the program themselves, then you really just, you don't see the benefit of kind of an employee managing it themselves. You just put that burden back on IT, so you have to keep it very simple. And one of the things we need to look at when we talked about a stipend was, what's the motivation to an employee to go do this if they wanted to go out and buy their own device, specifically in this program. And so we had to look at our existing costs. What does it cost us today to manage a laptop? And once we decided that we would come up with a stipend program, we basically identified our cost, and we did it over a 3-year basis because we have a 3-year cycle in which we refresh our laptop. And so over a 3-year period, it would cost Citrix anywhere from $2,500 to $2,600 in that cycle. Okay? And then we said, well, let's offer a stipend to employees that's, a motivator for them to participate in the program, and let's align the program with the same duration of our 3-year refresh cycle. So we made the program 3 years, and we basically said we're going to allow a $2,100 stipend. And that's so an employee could then purchase a laptop in addition to purchasing a 3-year warranty for that device. Because one of the added responsibilities that an employee has now, because they own that device, if that device has a failure, hardware failure, I can't help them anymore because I don't own that device. So they're going to have to return that device to the manufacturer for repair. Okay, so that was one of the responsibilities that an employee who participates in this program has to take on. And so the way this works, very simply, is an employee turns in their managed device. Our managers keep those devices. They go out and participate in the BYOC program, and let's say 6 months down the road, their BYOC device has a failure. Well, that goes back to the manufacturer, and they get one of the loaners. The loaners was really their old laptop. So we had kind of a self-provisioning old laptop program that just managers would give them back to the employees. So this way we didn't have to worry about a new device failing and an employee being out of touch without a device. And we aligned the program, as I said earlier, to the 3-year refresh policy. And then we talked to both HR and legal, and we were interested to see if we could create this program simple enough where we didn't have to change corporate policy. I didn't want to change corporate policy. I don't mind adding a few rules to a new program, but certainly didn't want to change any policy. And when we sat down with HR and legal, we found that we could keep all of our policies the same, and we would simply add some rules, and some rules around the program, which I'll go over in a few moments. And really, all policies stay in effect for the managed devices and BYOC devices. And as part of the registration process, there's a simple checkbox in a website, and I'll show you the website shortly, and it says a reminder to employees, which simply says, all corporate policies apply to me as a BYOC participant. And that was sufficient for both HR and legal. So we were able to keep all of our existing policies the same and simply add a few rules around the BYOC program. Then we sat and we talked about security. And when I sat with the IT security team, we actually drew this diagram up on a whiteboard, so I kind of created this slide for it. And this is sort of a snapshot of our environment. And to the far right of the slide is our data center. Now, all of our applications live in the data center. All right, so Active Directory is there as well, which identifies employees basically by their login. It authenticates them, and we deliver all our applications from one data center. So having a unmanaged device on the other end really doesn't matter, because I can still identify that person and I can authenticate them, and I know what applications to deliver them. So if I move to the center of the slide, and it's really more about the network and the security, and I think this is pretty typical of really any enterprise environment. You know, we have a perimeter firewall, an IPS IDS solution, web filtering, threat management. We also have a company that monitors 7x24. So I think that's pretty standard in just about any environment. And we said nothing really needs to change there either. And then we looked at the endpoint on the far left. And we said, okay, what is in that endpoint that is security? And really there's two things. One, there's the two-factor authentication for an employee who is connecting remotely. Now we use our Access Gateway solution. And then the second is the antivirus. Right? And so those were really the two things that we would put in an image, you know, before we gave it out to an employee if it were a managed device. So we had to come up with a way for an employee to really handle that themselves, and we basically created a website, and from that website they were able to download the Citrix receiver, and when you download that one client, it brings with it all of the appropriate plugins that they need to connect securely. So it would bring in the SSL VPN solution, it would bring in the solution to deliver applications or deliver a desktop, it'll bring in an encrypted data plugin, so it brings everything with it. And then the second download is the antivirus. And so we posted on this website basically our Citrix receiver and the antivirus. And in our case, we happen to use McAfee as the corporate standard. So as part of our licensing agreement with McAfee, we were allowed to deliver those licenses to a BYOC device as well. And that really solved our problem. So we allowed the employee to go out and purchase a device, go to our website, download the receiver, download the antivirus, and then they could connect securely. Right? And so we did try and keep it that simple for them. And then the last step was really coming up with the program rules, and kind of put the rules on one page and said if there's any more than 10 rules to a program, it's probably too complex. So we tried to keep it right at 10, and I talk about these in sort of 4 different categories. So you need your manager's approval. and you get that $2,100 stipend for your laptop, as well as a 3-year maintenance program. We had a proration policy, because if you leave the company before 3 years, we can prorate the stipend out of the last paycheck. Nice to have that policy in place just in case someone leaves early. You return your managed laptop to your manager, and that really creates that loaner program I spoke about in case your BYOC device fails. Your BYOC hardware issues are addressed by the vendor, as we had mentioned earlier. The antivirus is required, and we make that readily available off our website. All of our remote connections are through our SSL VPN solution. All of the applications are delivered from our data center as they are today. Everyone can provision their own apps, and really all existing corporate policies apply. And that was it. And those were really only the 10 rules that we needed to implement to basically guide people through this program. And we tried to keep it as simple as this, where you can go out and purchase your device, ready your device with 2 simple downloads, and then connect. And your experience would be the same as it would be with a managed device, only you got to pick and choose the endpoint. Take a quick look at the website. We made the website very simple as well. It has 4 tabs, and really on the first tab, it's the How It Works tab. And that basically is a description of the program and the rules that we just went over. And then there's an Enrollment tab, and in the Enrollment tab, it allows you to enroll in the program. It asks, sends an email to your manager for permission. Your manager approves it, and then you're in the program, and we start the workflow to get you your stipend so you can go out and buy your own laptop. The Getting Started page is the page that has the 2 downloads that we talked about, and that's the receiver download and the antivirus. And the Extras page, which is the last page, is basically how-to documents and how-to videos that helps you ready your PC. We also put a little blog on the front page and a discussion forum for employees to continue to exchange ideas about the program. All right, and with that, I will hand it back over.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you so much. That was great. Everyone, we are now going to go into the Q&A portion. We have about 15 minutes left, so plenty of time to do that. If you want to submit a question, you haven't done so, go ahead and use the polling or the question feature over on the right of the GoToWebinar interface. Before we do that, we're going to launch one last poll, and this one is just to see what kind of devices we're actively using today. Are we on a corporate device or a personal device, a laptop or a tablet? So while everyone does that, I'll go ahead and start some of the questions. This is probably a joint question for both Ben and Paul. It's a question about expenses. How are companies determining the breakpoint between business expenses versus personal expenses on, say, a smartphone plan for a BYO program, especially when it comes to taxes and IRS requirements? Ben or Paul wants to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. This is Paul. The way we do it is basically our corporate calling plan, and so employees are allowed to participate in the corporate calling plan. This way, they don't even see a bill. They just have a calling plan that they participate, and we manage all of that because we can share the minutes across thousands of employees. We can put them in a program that allows them to, if they're travelers or global travelers, we encompass all of that into one corporate program, and that works best. This way, the employees don't have to worry about making phone calls internationally or monthly vouchers. There's none of that. It all comes to us, and our procurement department consolidates all of that.
Yeah, and this is Ben. I'd validate that that's arguably the most efficient means in which you can do that. But for other organizations that have added support for personally owned devices, we've seen them come up with these stipend approaches, and it's typically a 3-tier approach. So, for task-oriented workers that aren't doing a lot of heavy international travel, that need to be able to expense back some of their ongoing voice and data services, it might be as little as $15 to $30 on a monthly basis. Whereas other line of business managers, it could very easily, or administrative professionals, be anywhere from $50 to $100. for executive managers and sales and IT that travel a lot and visit client sites, it could be as much as $100 to $150. But we're seeing a lot of IT managers revisit what these stipend models are and how much these employees are actually expensing back to the business, and trying to get better insight and visibility into that so they can proactively monitor and manage it, as opposed to reactively pour through expense reports. And so we're seeing a lot of companies now revisit their desktop and virtualization priorities in order to overcome a lot of these challenges, and to be able to granularly essentially separate out all the work, ongoing voice and data services from the personal.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. There's a whole bunch around security and some of the configurations. So Paul, I think these are probably from a Citrix standpoint good ones for you. One was around how do you support, well, let me go to this one first. How do you verify that the clients, the endpoint devices in the BYO program are using antivirus and that it's been active and up to date?
Well, I mean, there's several ways you can do it. I mean, we chose not to implement network access control points, and some companies are looking to do that. So if you have a network access control point, you can validate if a device at the endpoint has a current antivirus. We did not have a NAC solution in our infrastructure prior to BYOC, so we opted to roll out our program without implementing a NAC solution, and we've not had any difficulties around that. What we found is because these devices are now personally owned, that employees take extra special care, if you will, around those devices because it is their personal property. Everyone understands how disruptive a virus can be, and their personal life is on this device as well, and so they're inclined to protect this. And so we found that we really didn't have a need for a NAC solution. We allowed the employees to be on the honor system and ensure that they would download the antivirus. So we've had the program up and running for 2 years, and we've not had any issues with it. So we're going to stick with that. But some companies do look at a NAC solution, some just to send a warning, not to prevent anyone from accessing, but just to send a warning saying you have a device that potentially is a risk factor, and they'll identify the device and the user, and then IT can go chat with them. Or you can put in a full-blown solution that would allow that would prevent them from accessing the infrastructure.
Thanks, Paul. Another follow-up question is, I see a few of these coming in. It's really about what operating systems and types of devices do we support in our program at Citrix for the BYO?
Well, we're supporting just about everything. So any OS, any Mac, any Windows OS Macs, we support. The iPad, the iPhone, a host of mobile devices, the Droid. So realistically, we support anything. Specifically to BYOC, it's any laptop. But we also, in the non-stipend model, folks want to buy an iPad and bring that to work. They can download the receiver off the Apple Store, and they can connect, and we certainly support that as well. The same with the iPhone or the Droid or any other handheld device.
Okay, thanks. Next question, I'd like to see both Ben and Paul's input on that. It's really, what's the biggest challenge organizations might expect when preparing a BYO program?
So Forrester's actually got a lot of data on this very topic, and inevitably security is the biggest challenge that I think a lot of IT managers are facing. They're really concerned about locking down the corporate data, shifting that to the data center, and simply providing access to these consumer-centric devices. So to Paul's point, I think a lot of organizations striving to get there, but in the meantime, they're looking for a more efficient delivery mechanism for corporate data to these devices. Infrastructure and compatibility is also toward the top of the list. I mean, fundamentally, this is a pretty significant architectural shift for IT managers, and they realize it's probably going to be a long-term strategy. So making sure that they're coming up with their short and long-term recommendations, and then selling it to the business. You know, there are a lot of IT managers that are actually pretty enthusiastic about this. They're looking to offload a lot of the day-to-day break-fix support to their end users. And going back to the whole stipend discussion, we've even seen some progressive enterprise IT managers encouraging users actively to go above and beyond their allotted stipend model because, to Paul's point, you know, if they're spending an additional $100 or $200 out of their own pocket, chances are really good that they're going to take a lot better care of that machine than their old gray box that they've essentially been provisioned by IT. But security, infrastructure compatibility, and then just selling this to the business and making sure that they understand what business benefits that they're getting, but also understanding what responsibilities that they might now be taking on as well has been a big priority for IT.
Thanks, Ben. Paul, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, no, I think Ben's really hit it, and for us it was a bit easier because we were already in kind of a Citrix infrastructure and we were delivering all of the applications anyway. So that made it quite simple for us to implement this program. And you know, around the security, if you think about virtualized desktops, then you really don't care what that endpoint is because you're just delivering a corporate OS to an endpoint, and you know, whatever's on that personal device is really not going to matter. You're going to use it to connect to your virtual desktop, and you're going to work in that virtual desktop environment. That also provides another layer of protection, so to speak, or another layer of security. So a lot of companies are interested in moving to virtual desktops for that reason. This way they can secure and manage the desktop OS and just deliver it to any endpoint.
Okay, great. Another trend of questions we have coming up is all around kind of securing the device, safeguarding the data. So kind of a couple layers here is, how do we define, what an employee can and can't do on their device as far as applications, personal data, and then how do we safeguard the corporate data on that device and ensure it's safe and encrypted when IT doesn't own the device?
So I can start off. So a couple of parts to that question. Most of our data is really stored in the data center, although we allow employees to download data to their endpoint. One of the plugins that comes with the Citrix receiver is one of our plugins called ZenVault, and it's really an encrypted data plugin. And what that allows a user to do is from the data center download something onto their laptop, but it does download it into an encrypted space. So if that laptop is lost or stolen, they may get the device, but they wouldn't get the data that was there. And an IT manager can choose to either implement that strategy or not, but it is one of the plugins that will come with the receiver. As far as anything else, we keep all of our data and all of our applications in the data center, so they are secure there. I don't know that I don't know that there's another way for you to secure it other than you can prevent employees from downloading data from the data center. I mean, you have that type of control, especially in a Zen desktop or a virtualized desktop environment. I can restrict a user from downloading anything from the data center, if I want to go that far with it, or I can provide partial access. So I can limit the control that they have, or I can give them, no access. They can't download any data to their C drive. I can turn off USB ports and so on. So I can lock it down completely, or I can give them partial or give them free reign.
Okay, thanks. Ben, anything to add on top of that?
Well, I mean, clearly we're at a time in which IT managers are fundamentally revisiting this because, look, quite frankly, on XP machines over the last 10 years, way too many users have had full administrative rights to install whatever applications they needed, corrupting images, multiple language requirements, and so there's been a lot of complexity with managing this proliferation of devices and operating systems and screen sizes. And now, inevitably, as they're turning to a next-generation desktop strategy, they're looking at Windows 7. They're trying to shrink down the number of images, and in doing so, they're also looking to lock down more of their users. They're looking to standardize their users on the standard user account. But arguably, the best way to prevent data leakage is to centralize the data, shift the data from the endpoint device to the data center, which is inherently a lot easier to manage and patch and secure. And so arguably that is the most efficient means in which you can ensure compliance and security. But increasingly, we're also seeing companies outside of even a Bring Your Own PC campaign just preferring a more lockdown approach for most end users, for arguably 97 to 99% of end users with the standard user account. But in doing so, they're also certainly lighting up a lot of the full disk encryption solutions, which are now native within the newer operating systems available on the market.
Thanks, Ben. We have a couple questions kind of around the stipend a little bit. Probably one for Ben, one for Paul. I'll start with you, Ben. My organization isn't prepared to offer the traditional stipend program, but I still want to be able to support personal devices like the iPad. What are my options there, and can we still do some sort of BYO program?
So arguably, you still absolutely can. In fact, we've spoken with and engaged with a lot of clients that are exploring bring your own devices, but in terms of what their priorities are, inevitably iPad's toward the top of the list. And what I think a lot of firms are discovering is that the iPad isn't always a replacement for a standard desktop or a laptop. Rather, we're seeing a lot of companies adding support for employee-owned devices, employee-owned iPads that can possibly replace a corporate desktop. But more often than not, it supplements it so that if at the end of the day all they really need is access to the internet or access to one or two line of business applications for their job purposes, then the iPad is the preferred form factor because it's an ultralight device, the touch interface, and they can take it with them and not have to lug around their workforce machine.
Folks on the line,
but then separately, we're also seeing
Paul
some
we are approaching the top of the hour.
These
just
kinds
a few
of devices
closing,
like an iPad or a Slate actually introduce these
here.
devices to new
the
places.
The webinar is going to be available
as
a recording. You'll get some information about how to download that.
Stipend
and
isn't
we will
always
go ahead and
something that IT is actually
Q&A
prioritizing. We're finding that a lot of these highly empowered employees are more than willing to take on the additional costs and burdens associated with these devices because at the end of the day, they're just looking to be more productive. And so we've seen organizations explore Bring Your Own PC without offering a stipend. And in fact, we've seen a lot of end users be absolutely open to that because, look, at the end of the day, they just want to have a little bit more flexibility and control over their work environments. And we've seen IT certainly embracing that and lighting those pilots up.
Hey, Scott, can you hear me? Hello, are we back?
Paul, are you still there? Hi, Paul.